All right. Well, I think we'll get started. We have about an hour together. My name is Cassie Morton. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I work for the Nature Conservancy's wastewater pollution program, and today's webinar will highlight insights from the new TNC report, Advancing Wastewater Reuse for Conservation and Climate Solutions, which it explores how wastewater reuse can serve as a powerful strategy at the intersection of water security, environmental conservation, and climate resilience. This report draws from TNC's global experience and case studies from Florida to India to show how wastewater, when safely treated and reused, can reduce pollution, restore ecosystems, and strengthen our climate adaptation efforts. It also identifies key barriers, particularly around policy, and offers practical recommendations to help us scale reuse solutions globally. We're fortunate to be joined today by several of our report contributors, both current and past TNC staff, who will share their expertise on the topic. First, I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Nupur Bapuly, the lead author of the report. Nupur is a policy analyst with the Nature Conservancy's India program and a CODA fellow who supported the Pacific Division program. Her CODA project explored where and how TNC is engaged in the issue of wastewater reuse and activities and how policy might be supportive of advancing these activities. Nupur will walk us through key findings from the report, highlighting why wastewater reuse is gaining global momentum and where policy gaps remain, and what enabling conditions are needed to scale the solutions. And with that, I will hand it over to Nupur.
Thanks, Cassie. Good morning and good evening, everyone. Cassie has already introduced me. I am Dr. Nupur Bapuly. I'm the policy lead at TNC India and also a core member of the TNC Asia Pacific's Policy and Partnership Network. And I've had this great opportunity to work as part of the TNC Pacific Division's wastewater pollution program and work on the SCODA fellowship and I would really take a moment to acknowledge the fact that I've got huge support from Cassie, Joss, Naabia, Garrett, Kishore to put together this report. And it took over a year to come out with the findings. And so I'll get started off on the findings. And before I do that, let me first start with why this matters. Cassie, can you move on to the next slide? Thank you. Around the world, we are facing a growing convergence of water, climate, and environmental challenges. Freshwater resources are under increasing pressure from pollution, groundwater depletion, and climate-induced water stress. At the same time, many ecosystems continue to experience declining water quality and habitat degradation. Traditionally, wastewater has been viewed as a waste stream that must be treated and disposed of. However, a growing body of evidence suggests that wastewater can also be viewed as a valuable resource. When appropriately treated and reused, wastewater can reduce pressure on freshwater systems, improve water quality, support ecosystem restoration, and contribute to climate resilience. What I found particularly interesting during this fellowship was that many of the successful wastewater reuse initiatives were not driven primarily by wastewater management objectives. Instead, they were responding to broader challenges such as water security, ecosystem restoration, and environmental resilience. For conservation organizations like TNC, this presents an important opportunity. Wastewater reuse is no longer simply a water management issue. It is increasingly becoming a conservation and climate solution. This led to the central question of my fellowship. What policy, institutional, and implementation conditions are required to scale wastewater reuse as a conservation and climate solution? Next slide, Cassie. So before I talk about the findings, I just want to quickly highlight on the methodology that was used for this report. And I adopted a comparative approach that combined evidence from policy, practice, and stakeholder perspectives. First, I reviewed wastewater reuse policies and regulatory frameworks across multiple countries to understand how different jurisdictions are approaching governance, regulation, and implementation. Second, I assist a range of TNC projects that Cassie rightly mentioned, spanning diverse geographies. And third, I engaged with TNC experts. Some of them have joined us today, wastewater practitioners, corporate partners to better understand implementation challenges, enabling conditions, and emerging opportunities for scaling wastewater reuse. By bringing together these three sources of evidence, I was able to identify recurring patterns and common lessons from across different geographies and contexts. Next slide, please. The first and perhaps most important finding that was basically the successful was that successful wastewater reuse initiatives were rarely designed as wastewater projects alone. Instead, they were designed to address broader environmental and societal challenges that stakeholders already cared about. For example, in Florida, wastewater reuse was closely linked to strengthening water resilience. In the Long Island experience, we saw that how wastewater interventions were linked to broader goals around water quality improvement, nutrient management, and coastal ecosystem health. Projects in Hawaii and Ecuador were also connected to larger objectives such as coral reef protection and watershed restoration. Although these projects differed significantly in geography and context, they shared a common characteristic. They were all solving a larger problem. And what was striking was that wastewater reuse was not the end goal. Rather, it served as a tool for achieving broader environmental, social, and ecological outcomes. This has important implications for how we frame wastewater reuse. When positioned solely as a wastewater management intervention, its relevance can remain limited. However, when linked to challenges that communities, government, and investors are already trying to solve, it becomes more compelling and easier to scale. And this naturally raised another question for me. If successful projects were solving larger problems, what actually enabled them to move from concept to implementation and scale? And that brings me to the second finding. Next slide, please. The second finding challenged a common assumption. When wastewater reuse projects struggle, technology is often seen as the primary barrier. However, across the cases reviewed, technology was rarely the limiting factor. Instead, successful implementation consistently depended on governance. Projects were more likely to succeed when there was regulatory clarity, institutional coordination, stakeholder engagement, and long term accountability. What was particularly interesting was that these characteristics appeared across very different geographies and contexts. The lesson here is simple. Scaling wastewater reuse is not primarily a technical challenge, it is fundamentally a governance challenge. This finding also helped explain why some jurisdictions have managed to be more successful than others in moving from pilot projects to large scale implementation. And that naturally led me to the next question. If governance matters so much, are our regulatory frameworks helping or hindering the adoption of wastewater reuse? Next slide, please. The third finding emerged from the policy review and focused on how wastewater reuse is regulated. Across many jurisdictions, I observed a recurring challenge. Very different reuse applications are often governed through similar treatment expectations, despite carrying very different levels of risk. For example, industrial reuse, agricultural reuse, potable reuse, each involve different exposure pathways and risk profiles. Yet regulatory frameworks frequently apply uniform standards across these diverse applications. This can increase costs, delay implementation, and limit opportunities for scaling wastewater reuse. The key lesson is that different users carry different risks and therefore require different treatment and management approaches. In other words, one size does not fit all. This finding highlighted the need for a more risk-based and application-specific approach to wastewater reuse. And that brings me to the fourth finding, which explores what such an approach could look like in practice. Next slide, please. If one-size-fits-all approaches create barriers to adoption, what does a practical alternative look like? One of the key contributions of this report was moving beyond the concept of fit for purpose reuse and developing practical tools for implementation. The report proposes a comprehensive fit for purpose wastewater reuse policy checklist that synthesizes lessons from global best practices, TNC project experiences, and stakeholder consultations. The checklist is designed to help policymakers and practitioners assess whether the necessary governance, regulatory, and institutional conditions are in place to support wastewater reuse. Recognizing that countries and jurisdictions operate at different levels of readiness, the report also proposes a two-tier structure for reuse policy implementation. Tier 1 focuses on establishing the foundational conditions for safe and effective reuse, and Tier 2 builds upon this foundation by incorporating advanced elements such as risk-based standards, decentralized and nature-based solutions, climate resilience, and innovative financing mechanisms, amongst others. Together, these tools provide a practical roadmap for moving from policy ambition to implementation. Given the time available today, I will not get into the checklist in detail, but the report provides a structured framework that can be adapted across different geographies and governance contexts. Importantly, the objective is not simply to encourage wastewater reuse, but to ensure that it can be implemented safely, effectively, and at scale. Next slide, please. The fifth finding emerged from the project assessments and highlighted the potential of nature-based systems in wastewater reuse. What makes these systems particularly valuable is their ability to generate multiple benefits simultaneously. For example, the project in Mexicali demonstrated how treated wastewater can support environmental flows while also improving habitat conditions. Similarly, the lake restoration work in Chennai illustrated how wastewater management interventions can contribute to improved water quality and ecological recovery. These examples demonstrate that nature-based systems can help bridge the gap between wastewater management and conservation outcomes. And for organizations like TNC, they provide tangible examples of how wastewater reuse can deliver benefits for both people and nature. Importantly, they also generate the evidence needed to inform future policy, investment, and implementation decisions. However, even when these benefits are well understood, scaling wastewater reuse still requires investment and broader stakeholder participation. And that led to the final finding of the study. Next slide, please. The final finding focused on the role of the private sector. One of the most encouraging insights from our interviews was that lack of interest is not the primary challenge. Many companies, organizations already recognize wastewater reuse as strategically important for water stewardship, business resilience, and long-term sustainability. The challenge is translating that interest into action and investment. Across stakeholder interviews, a consistent message emerged. Organizations are more likely to invest when there is clarity, predictability, and confidence in the broader operating environment. By enabling environment, I mean clear regulatory frameworks, predictable approval processes, well-defined standards, and long-term policy signals that provide confidence for investment and innovation. In other words, the issue is not whether the private sector wants to participate. The issue is whether the conditions exist for participation to scale. This finding suggests that wastewater reuse is not only a technical or environmental opportunity, but also an opportunity for stronger partnerships between governments, utilities, conservation organizations, communities, and the private sector. Taken together, these findings point toward a set of strategic priorities for scaling wastewater reuse as a conservation and climate solution. Next slide, please. Based on the findings from this research, there have been other strategic priorities as well. But then, in the interest of time, I have looked at five strategic priorities that emerge for scaling wastewater reuse. These include adopt fit for purpose regulatory frameworks, strengthening governance and institutional coordination, expanding nature based solutions, creating enabling conditions for private sector participation, and positioning wastewater reuse as part of broader conservation and climate strategies. Importantly, the report goes beyond identifying these priorities. It also provides fit for purpose wastewater reuse policy checklist and a two-tier policy implementation structure that can help translate these recommendations into action. Together, these tools provide a practical pathway for moving from policy ambition to implementation. Now, the final question is what these findings and implementation tools mean for organizations like TNC. And that brings me to my final slide. Next slide, please. The final takeaway from this work is that wastewater reuse represents an important opportunity for TNC to accelerate conservation outcomes through policy, partnerships, and pilots. The findings suggest that TNC is uniquely positioned to contribute in three ways. First, as a convener, bringing together governments, utilities, practitioners, researchers, corporate partners, and communities, where communities are also given the ownership in in the initiatives that we are proposing. Second, as a policy partner, supporting the development of governance frameworks, practical approaches for wastewater reuse implementation, implementing fit for purpose frameworks, or embedding wastewater reuse in urban plannings and other planning documents. And third, as a demonstrator, generating evidence through on-ground projects that showcase that successful wastewater reuse can be achieved. Ultimately, the opportunity for TNC is not simply to support wastewater reuse projects. It will also help us to create conditions that allow wastewater reuse to scale. With that, I would like to thank everyone for their time and attention, and I look forward to the discussion and any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Nupur. Next, we'll hear from Naabia Ofosu-Amaah, the Senior Corporate Engagement Advisor for Water and Resilience at TNC. Naabia works at the intersection of business and conservation, helping corporate partners integrate water stewardship and wastewater reuse into their operations. I'll hand it over to you, Naabia.
Thank you, Cassie. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Nupur, for those findings, which I think are really relevant for what I'm about to share about kind of where we're seeing companies in this space, what they're interested in working on, and how we're seeing that space evolve over time. So if you go to the next slide, please, Cassie. Just some context setting about why companies. So as Cassie mentioned, I'm a senior corporate engagement advisor here at the Nature Conservancy. I'm based in Washington, D.C. I've been here for almost 10 years working on conservation with companies and thinking about how they can engage in freshwater topics. And we often get this question about, why companies? Why is this a focus area for the Nature Conservancy and other partners that engage in this space? So I'm sure people are likely familiar with this figure here from the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN on global water sector withdrawals. So the blue is what is withdrawn by municipalities, the orange is what is withdrawn by industry, and then the green is agriculture. So the orange bar, that industrial water withdrawal, is about 19% of the total withdrawals that are happening worldwide. But a lot of the corporations also have significant influence over the agricultural water withdrawals through their supply chains and the inputs and ingredient that go into their products. So a study that was done by the CEO Water Mandate a few years ago showed that 150 companies globally, so just the withdrawals of those companies, including their operations and supply chains, is responsible for a third of the global water withdrawals. So if we think about actors who we want to influence in terms of their use and management of water, you could have a really significant impact focusing on, some of the world's largest corporations. We also know that last year the UN declared that we are in the era of global water bankruptcy. So I often get a question from people, does this matter? Yes, water withdrawal is going up, but we have enough water on the planet. Isn't it okay that we're withdrawing this much? I think the answer to that question now is no, it's not okay. We're in an era of global water bankruptcy. We are seeing that most of the world is experiencing water crises. We don't have access to a supply of good quality water that we need as people. So this is something that we should be paying attention to. If you go to the next slide, please, Cassie. We also know that in addition to those water withdrawals, we're seeing other threats that are posed to freshwater ecosystems from industrial activities. And those include eutrophication, so excessive nutrients in water, water quality challenges, depletion of groundwater sources, other contaminations from metals, from plastics, and then also diverting and transferring water from different places. And this comes from a range of industries that we engage in. So from a TNC perspective, we like to engage with partners from all sectors of society to understand their activities and to find ways to ensure that nature can be included as part of the solution and how they work and how they operate. Next slide. So in response to some of that, that need for water withdrawals and also understanding that there are water risks and challenges that companies are facing, we have seen a growth in what we term corporate water stewardship, or companies engaging in their watersheds and engaging within their operations to be as efficient and effective as possible, really growing since the early 2000s. So you can see the light blue text on here are companies that have set water specific goals and targets. So you can see that that's just growing over time. And then there are also a number of globally relevant initiatives and guidance documents that have been developed, and a range of collective action initiatives that have evolved over time as well, as we've seen more and more companies want to engage in a water space and set specific goals and targets related to that. And on the next slide, you can see also how we've seen this progress from companies. So if you just click through, you'll see some of this coming up, Cassie. So, sorry, if you go back one, thank you. So I think part of my slide has disappeared here, but that's okay. So there is a progression that is meant to be at the top there that starts at kind of operational efficiency, moving to water risks and targets, moving to engaging in the watershed, then engaging on policy and collective action, and then engaging suppliers. So there is really a wide range of actors who are engaging in this space. TNC is just one of those, but we kind of engage across that progression. And we see water reuse coming in at different points. So those are those icons at the top of this slide. Oftentimes we may think about water reuse just for companies just being related to what's happening within their facilities, right? They are producing different products, they are, manufacturing different things. And so that's where the water comes into their operations, and they're going to think about reusing it there. But we can also think about water reuse as being a tool that companies can advocate for in the watersheds where they are engaging. They can work with communities on that, they can work in the watersheds on that. And this also can come into the policy engagement and engagement with suppliers. So when we think about how corporates can be good stewards of their water resources, we shouldn't only think about how companies may innovate inside of their manufacturing facilities or their factories, but also opportunities to engage outside of that. So you go to the next slide, please. There are, as I mentioned, some of those guidances and tools, and if you click again, you'll see that, these are some of the activities that we're seeing companies engage in outside of their operations. I know the text is quite small, but these are things like agricultural best management practices or constructed wetlands, or water sanitation and hygiene activities. And if you click again, you'll see that under demand management, efficiency, reuse, and irrigation is one of the types of activities that's included in this kind of industry standard guidance for how companies can engage on volumetric water benefits. So activities that are delivering water back into systems. So again, just reinforcing that point that when companies think about the types of activities they might want to do to help reduce their water risks, we're seeing reuse come in very clearly as something that companies should be considering. And then on the next slide, I just wanted to share an example here on how we're seeing some of this come in from the Nature Conservancy and the types of companies that we've worked with. If you click through again, you'll see that, yes, it's some of those activities related to land management or nature-based solutions. But a lot of what Nupur was talking about around governance is something that's really critical in a way that companies can engage as they're thinking about managing their water-related risks. Also, to mention here that companies are really thinking about those physical risks, but also regulatory risks to their operations. So, something that we heard in this process of developing this report and speaking to companies was this idea that they are interested in exploring water reuse, but feel that there are regulatory barriers to doing so, and that may pose a reputational or regulatory risk to their business and their operations if they tried something related to water reuse but it was not possible based on the regulatory environment. So if you click again, you'll see some of the companies that TNC engages with on water issues. And then if you click again, we had a conversation with companies around policy, and a lot of that focused on reuse at the UN Water Conference in 2023. And you can see the number of stars here. So a lot of companies voted that policy was the priority topic that they wanted to discuss with other corporates. And a lot of that conversation focused around water reuse. And again, this spans industries, it's technology, it's food and beverage, it's water services. They're all thinking about, how can they understand what's happening from a policy perspective, ensure that they're meeting the regulatory requirements and not posing any additional risks to their businesses, and have opportunities to innovate. And reuse is really critical and central in that conversation. So finally, I wanted to share an example from a specific industry that has gotten a lot of focus in the reuse conversations recently around technology. So this information comes from the Water Reuse Association, who we had some conversations with. They've been working with a number of companies thinking about how to promote water reuse within the industrial space. From a technology perspective, we've seen that data centers, semiconductor manufacturing plants are trying to think about ways to recycle water. And there is a strong business case for this that applies to many other sectors as well. So thinking about, a lot of the things we heard Nupur mention and Cassie in her introduction about how recycling water can reduce reliance on other water supplies, that it can also be cost efficient for corporations. It can have benefits for people, for also the communities and the environment. And there are a number of examples of how different AI players are starting to incorporate water reuse into, the way that they're moving their business. So again, we're starting to see some of these small examples, these smaller projects, and looking for opportunities to scale this and make sure that, policy is not a barrier that's getting in the way, especially in an industry like technology that we've seen is really growing very, very fast around the world. So hopefully that provides everyone with an overview of how we as TNC think about engaging companies, why it's important to think about the corporate sector in these conversations about water reuse, how they can engage both within their operations, but also with communities and on policy, and that there really has been interest in recent years in companies in having this sort of conversation. So thank you so much and look forward to answering more questions and discussing on the panel.
Thank you, Naabia. Really appreciate that. Let's see. Stop. Okay, great. Next, we will hear from Garrett Wallace. Garrett is the Government Relations Director for TNC's Southern Division. He brings deep expertise in water policy and has played a key role in advancing Florida's leadership in wastewater reuse. I'll hand it over to you, Garrett.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for making time to join us today. As Cassie mentioned, I'm based in the state of Florida, here in Tallahassee, Florida today. And in Florida, we are very fortunate that our residents, our tourists, and our elected officials respect and value the role that water plays in the quality of life in the state of Florida, and quite frankly, in the economy of the state of Florida. And so much so that in the 1970s, Florida adopted some very, very advanced water law to protect the natural resources related to water consumption and water pollution in the state of Florida. Chapter 373, as it is commonly called, outlines this regulatory scheme that everyone must apply for when you're using consumptive use of water, whether it's for the use of a brand new hotel or an Anheuser-Busch facility that's producing beer. All of them are held to a standard where we are trying to do no harm, where we are working towards having assured supply for both the natural system and the public. It's a very, very progressive, advanced step that I'm proud to be a very, very, very small part of. To that end, Florida has a very robust water supply planning process that outlines future population growth estimates, the future demand for water. And in 2017, it was identified that we were, as a state, approximately 800 million gallons under what our population projections should be for the demand of public drinking water supply. And people began looking into alternative water supply plans and how we can find a way to fill this gap. Thankfully, some forward-thinking legislators and a forward-thinking Secretary of the Environmental Protection Agency of Florida came together and created an entity called the Potable Reuse Commission. And the Potable Reuse Commission was convened to include local utility leaders and experts, public health and safety experts, members of the Florida business community, members of the Florida agricultural community, and nonprofits. And I was honored to be asked to join as a representative of the nonprofit community to talk about how we can grow potable reuse as an actual water supply tool in the state of Florida to meet that demand. While I don't ever believe in coincidences, it is ironic that we identified an 800 million gallon a day shortfall in water supply demands. Every day, Florida discharges 800 million gallons of treated wastewater back into the natural system. Our mission became very, very quickly to work to find what we needed to do to be able to capture that 800 million gallons of water that's being discharged to the system, back to the natural system, and close that loop so that we had that water captured and being put much more quickly into the public drinking water supply. After 18 months worth of public meetings and process, we discovered a series of reports, which we can get that link to y'all if you'd like to see it, that talks about what we needed to do to be able to make potable water a viable drinking water source. And as Nupur mentioned, governance is a big part of this. So what it came down to was the fact that in Florida, statutorily, we needed to change the definition of water to include potable reuse as an actual applicable drinking water source so that a utility who wished to get to work on reclaiming this water and putting it back in the public supply would be able to have statutory assurance that water in a potable reuse setting is a legal drinking water source in the state of Florida so that they could apply and receive loans or secure debt to build a small scale $150 million wastewater treatment plant. We needed to have that done. So in the course of two legislative sessions, I was a part of a team that worked with our legislature in the state capitol here in Florida to change the definition of the word water that now allows for potable reuse to be able to be a drinking water source. And this is so critical for us, particularly from the Nature Conservancy's perspective, is our objective and the reason we were there was to try to help protect the natural system. It was very, very critical in our eyes that with the very quickly growing population in the state of Florida and the very, very intense demands our water supply had, the natural system would be the first to lose. And this Potable Reuse Commission identified that, respected that, and found a way to help us identify how we're going to get that done. Naabia also mentioned the Water Reuse Association here in Florida. We are a very strong partner with that group, looking across the country to find ways to expand and grow potable reuse as a drinking water supply. And I think we've achieved many, many things over the last several years when it comes to standardizing potable reuse as a water supply source. We have miles and miles to go, which perhaps later I can talk to about that as well. But it's been a very interesting case study for the Nature Conservancy in Florida to be a leader in this space. We're very proud of the work that we've done, and frankly, we're very proud of the Potable Reuse Commission as a group for achieving what it did in a relatively short of time when it comes to governance. So, Cassie, if I may turn the floor back to you, and I'll be happy to answer questions if they come up later. Thank you.
Thank you, Garrett. And finally, we'll hear from Kishore Kumar Kabirdasan, who is an environmental engineer, formerly with TNC's India program. Kishore specializes in urban conservation and nature-based solutions and will speak about the Chennai, India case study, where decentralized nature-based wastewater reuse systems are being implemented.
Thank you so much once again for inviting me over here. First of all, it is good to be back with TNC folks. And I'm very close to this project because I started my career with this project in 2018 when I got graduated from my master's program. So let me start this project with a little bit of a timeline. So when you talk about the development of a city, industrialization plays a major role in it. And the city where I come from, Chennai, is actually one of the southernmost tip of the country, India. It's a coastal city. The city was actually was good national power and also good water systems, which actually forced the government to set up all the industrial activities in the city, which forced most of the people from the other parts of the state to move towards Chennai city. Gradually, the movement was taking place, and at the end of maybe 1999 or 2000, the IT sector started to bloom, which attracted more graduates to move to Chennai and start getting settled. And since people started to move, it Chennai started to get to get filled, and Chennai also started to extend beyond its level, and even it occupied the suburb areas. And at one point of time in 2013 and 14, people started to realize Chennai is not developing, it's not expanding, it's exploding actually, because the capacity of holding, the land holding capacity started to increase, which indirectly impacted the suburban areas also. And when people start to look for a place to settle up, they always look for the first major thing they look for is, do I have a water source for me to sustain? And then someone gave a very wrong information that if you settle close to a lake or a water body, anytime you can get some water, there will be no problem in it. And people started to settle very close to the water bodies, and they started to cover the entire, land spaces, not even giving a few breathing space. And also they forgot the actual house owners who are the flora and fauna. And 2015, that gave a big, wake-up session for the entire city of Chennai and also the state of Tamil Nadu, which is we had a flood. So the city geographically has a good coastline and a good marshland, huge number of man-made and natural lakes, well connected, still suffered a flood situation, which acted for more than 4 to 5 days. Then we understood that what's the problem and we have a good connecting channels. Then the lake expert said to me, I was in my master's, that then my lake expert said to me, the good lake looks like it should be dried up in the summer season and it should be filled in the rainy season. That's how a good lake can be certified. But what's happening over here? Already I mentioned there are both man-made and natural connecting system between the lakes. Most of the people who got settled, they started to, leave out their sewages into this channel. Again, a common mindset that, whenever you want to dilute something, put it in the lake or put it in the water body, it gets carried out to the ocean, and the problem is solved. Then, again, what's wrong with the floods? Because there are some buffer areas around the lakes which was acting as a water holding areas where whenever there's excess water coming from this flood, these places will be filled with this excess water and then they got absorbed by the lake, which actually prevents the flood overtaking the areas. Now this place were also occupied by the people, and then slowly Chennai was actually stepping into a victim of water and wastewater problems and also the climate change because you destroy their flora and you disturb the fauna, and then obviously the climate change has started to behave very harsh to the people of Chennai because we stopped getting the actual patterns of rains. So again, drought started to take place. The worst part is 2018 had a worst flood when compared to 2015, and 2019 had a drought. So you can actually see both the extremes were faced in the city of Chennai this month. Okay, so the place where we are working right now is we work as a Sembakam, which is the outskirts of the city of Chennai. And the best part is it's the cascading lake system, which has close to 8 to 9 lakes, which finally get into the marshland. The maybe we can take 5,000 hectares these lakes were covering, and then each lake will be roughly around 500 to 600 hectares, which was actually acting as the one water source for the people who are living over there. And then we stepped into this lake and we found out the two more major problems with this lake is one, it is not providing the water source. Two, it was started acting as a septic tank, like a tank which holds the entire sewage of the city or the area, and it was actually indirectly causing flood and also health impacts. Okay, now as usual, TNC stepped in with the help of the government of Tamil Nadu. So we first identified what's the major problem. First, the sewages were coming in, uncontrolled sewage to be precisely. And then when we asked the community, okay, what is that you require? They said that first, we don't want flood problems. Second, we want good water access. Okay, you guys occupied it and still you're asking for this. So we can't be blunt to them. So we proposed a solution that, okay, we have a solution which solves your two problems. One is we will treat this wastewater and give it back. And then people started with their own stigmas by telling that no, we don't touch anything which is coming from a waste. Even though we try to explain them what is about recycling, you don't have water in the future, you need to start using your waste, but still people have this mental mindset that no, we can't use wastewater. Okay, so now you need to solve a problem where flood and wastewater is there. And typically, like every individual thinks from a government perspective or environmental engineer perspective, let's set up an estimate. Well, the government initially, like some before TNC, they set up a STP plant, sewage treatment plant. And yeah, they focused on the capex cost, but they failed to cover the OPEX cost. So the operational maintenance was gone. So people were now even more pissed. Even government came up with a solution. There is no answer for it because no one is there to maintain. Now we need to come up with a solution which tackles both things. One, it should serve the problem. Second, it should take care of itself. And by God's grace, one best thing happened with this lake is we had a close to 4 to 5 hectares of empty area inside the lake. Okay, fine. Let's go. Let's reuse it. How to reuse it? Let's go with a nature-based solution. When we proposed this system to the community was like, oh, again, you guys are coming up with another sewage treatment plan. Then we clearly informed them that no, this is not a conventional sewage treatment plan. This is a nature-based solution. You won't even see where the treatment is happening. It's going to be natural. One, we are not going to use any chemical interferences, chemical substance to treat this. Two, we are not going to build anything. We are not going to build any concrete structures or steel structures. Everything is going to be natural. Okay, then people are like, again, this water is coming from a treatment plant. How we will use it? Okay, we are not going to directly connect the wastewater to your houses. Instead, we are going to send this treated water into the lake itself. Once the soil itself has some level of treating the lake naturally. Okay, so we said, okay, we're not going to send the water directly to your house. Instead, we're going to treat this water, send it back to the lake, and then this water will improve the groundwater level, and then you can, easily utilize this water. Okay, but what about the flood issues? We said that obviously we need to see where are the encroachments are. We need to build a proper sewage transfer and also runoff transfer. So we need to build a proper connecting structures and also increase the bund levels of the lake. And also still you couldn't actually, come up with a solution of expanding the capacity of the lake. Then we came up with an idea. What if we dredge the lake? Okay, and the dredge the lake means like removing the top layer of the soil. And again, there was a two solution. When we were when we dredged the lake, the top layer was removed, which was nothing but layers and layers of sewage which got deposited like maybe 2 decades, which allowed percolation to increase. At the same time, the water holding capacity of the lake also increased. So it's not. And then at the time, I was not working with TNC, but I was working for TNC. I was enrolled in an education institution, the government education institution, where I was actually taking care of the water quality and soil quality. So my job will be like I'll be coordinating the TNC official and meeting the people, explaining the things. So one gentleman actually asked me, "Okay, fine, you are doing the test, and you're telling me that the lake water quality is improved. Still, you have the chances of fabricating the results. I said, like, yes, but we don't do that application. But what if I give you a natural toolkit to test the water quality has improved? Where, after some days or after some months, probably like 1 or 2 months or 3 months after this activities were completed, the birds started to come. Then I said to him, so birds are back. You yourself said the birds are, we couldn't find the birds like some 3 4 years. Now the birds are back. That means the quality of water has increased. And the lakes, another big problem is water has was removed. The spread area was increased. And birds are back. I said, this is your natural, quality assurance by telling that the water is in good quality. And this project also, helped the government to look from another perspective. Every time when there is a flood issue or a wastewater issue, you shouldn't always go with the conventional sewage treatment plant because no one is going to, give a success for it. I mean, appreciate the efforts because you need to put a person, you need to maintain it. Chemicals are going to be involved, and then steel structures or concrete structures are going to be involved. May or may not, it might affect the water quality. But we actually showed, TNC actually showed the government of Tamil Nadu that yes, there is a solution where you doesn't need to use any conventional treatment system, but you can go with a nature-based treatment system. The maintenance of this, the nature-based solution, the reed bed technology system is actually way less when compared to any biological treatment system or conventional treatment system you put in. But there is always a but when we come with a solution which is land availability. What if anyways, for any lakes or any number of lakes, if you want to go and improve the water quality, you will be looking for sewage treatment plant. But what if the lake has a little bit of a space where you can utilize for nature-based solution? That's where you are actually going to make a change. And this was one of the first of a kind of a project in South India or India. I'm not sure. Little bit trusted. So, but this actually paved way for people, government, and every universal stakeholders to think, okay, there is a nature-based solution where the wastewater can be reused. This another one good important feature. This is a suburban of a city, but what if we shift this technology where agriculture practices are happening? With the help of this reed-bed treatment system, the sludge from the sewage can be actually separated, and this can be reused for agricultural activities instead of depending on fertilizers, chemical-based fertilizers. You can actually use a natural fertilizer. So you are not wasting a single drop of wastewater. There is, if you go to effluent treatment plant, there is this term called zero liquid discharge. That means you shouldn't waste the last drop of wastewater. So similarly, you can have the zero liquid discharge technology in sewage also, where you can actually use the last bit of drop of water and also sludge to fulfill your actual requirements. So yeah, as I said, this is a short story about how we intervened and we solved the taboo of not using the wastewater, still managed to prevent the floods and bring wastewater, bring good water quality to both the existing house owners and the previous house owners, the flora and fauna. That's the story about this case study. Any questions? I'm ready to answer you guys.
Thank you so much, Kishore. Well, thank you so much to all of our panelists. We would love to open up question Q&A. You are welcome to add your questions to the Q&A. You should see a button down below to do that, to type it in, or you can raise your hand, either one. In the meantime, we have a question for Nupur. The report highlights that policy is often the main bottleneck to scaling reuse, even when tech and finance exist. Based on your research and recommendations, what is the most critical policy shift needed to unlock wider adoption?
For the question, based on the research, I would argue that the most important policy shift is moving from one size fits all regulations to fit for purpose, risk-based reuse frameworks. One of the biggest barriers to scaling reuse is that there are different applications are often regulated in the same way. Agricultural irrigation, industrial cooling, potable reuse, they carry different risks, yet they frequently face similar treatment expectations. So leading jurisdictions such as California, Singapore, EU have increasingly moved towards aligning treatment and monitoring requirements with intended use and risk. And the objective here is to basically not lower the standards, but to apply the right standards to the right use. And importantly, fit for purpose frameworks will also provide greater regulatory clarity. Because that is again one of the important aspects when we talk about the involvement of corporate partners. They clearly define reuse categories because this framework will define reuse categories, treatment requirements, monitoring expectations, and institutional responsibilities. And this reduces uncertainty for project developers, utilities, and investors. And that has implications beyond regulation because throughout our stakeholder interviews, private sector actors repeatedly emphasized, and even Nabe was also mentioning about that part, the importance of predictability and long-term policy signals. And when the rules are clear, investment becomes much more easier. So in my view, yes, adopting fit for purpose, risk-based frameworks is not only a regulatory reform, but it is also an important enabler for innovation, investment, and scaling wastewater reuse.
Thank you, Nupur. The next question is for Naabia. Catherine says, thank you for all your insights. Naabia loves seeing the volumetric indicators. From a health lens, there's an interesting research showing the effectiveness of antimicrobial resistance bacterial and gene removal is affected by the water matrix going into the system. I'm curious what information the volume improved indicator captures and what it is typically based on.
Yeah, thank you for that. And Catherine, I'm happy to connect offline on this. It's um, area that's very niche within the corporate water stewardship space in terms of how companies are thinking about taking a high level estimate of the volume that has been shifted in the hydrology based on the activities that have been taken place on the ground. And generally, companies want to use that volume or claim that volume against their operational water use, and to help them achieve a goal. So many companies are setting a goal that says for 100% of the water that we are withdrawing in our high risk watersheds, we're going to do projects that return water back into the system. And they use that guidance document that I showed to estimate how much the projects they have have initiated have done that. In terms of those different indicators, there is a very long technical appendix of that volumetric water benefit accounting 2.0 guidance that was put together by the World Resources Institute, Limnotech, and Blue Risk and released last year. That kind of goes into for each of those different activities and those different indicators, what sort of changes in the hydrology are we expecting based on activities, and therefore, if it's volume provided, for an example, that is how companies can claim that benefit. So I will share a link. I'll put that in the chat, a link to that document for anyone to take a look into that. And you can see how companies are working with their consultancies to come up with these estimates. And then I'll just say from a TNC perspective, we try to remain a bit neutral on that process. We engage a lot with companies on projects. Companies provide funding to TNC. It's for our conservation work. What they choose to claim towards their sustainability goals is up to them. And the indicators that they choose and the process they use is a decision that we want to stay out of to maintain kind of the transparency in the process. So we encourage companies to use a third party to quantify, and we really want them to use that guidance that I mentioned because it has become the industry standard. It's been kind of peer reviewed, but we don't want to get in the business of telling companies how to claim their sustainability goals, if that makes sense. So I'll share a link and happy to chat with anybody offline about all of that.
Thank you, Naabia. I think we have time for one more question. This is for Garrett. Public perception is highlighted as a major barrier in potable reuse. How did Florida begin to build public trust and overcome the ick factor around the issue?
Thank you, Cassie. That's a great question. The challenges we face in Florida is twofold. First, we have an influx of new residents moving from other countries, other parts of the United States, who simply lack the knowledge of understanding where their water comes from, and they don't see a problem unless there's no water at the kitchen sink. So our approach on this immediately after the legislation passed was to conduct some public polling to help Floridians understand where their water comes from and we can base our guidance and actions and outreach steps based upon the fundamental knowledge that we had. And our understanding was that 47% of Floridians didn't even understand where their drinking water came from. Wasn't sure if it was surface water, groundwater, and the ick factor of a toilet to tap legislation that allowed recycled water to become drinking also allowed us to have an understanding that people didn't realize what their utilities were already having to do to drinking water to treat it. And then with the advent of the COVID pandemic and the understandings of how we were able to track using wastewater, the emerging contaminants issue is something that has something that we must collectively work on to ensure public's trust in our drinking water supply. And so we frankly are at the cusp, at the beginning of helping Floridians understand and trust that their wastewater is treated to a drinking water standard. The byproduct that comes from that process is treated effectively and maintained securely so we don't have additional pollutant opportunities. And I think we are just frankly, as I said, at the beginning of this exercise to help educate Floridians. And frankly, they're doing it with beer. They're using reclaimed water in beer processing to try to gain public acceptance to some Floridians' favorite beverage. So I offer that, Cassie. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Garrett. We do have a few minutes left, but I want to respect everyone's time. Is there anything else any of the panelists want to add or share as just a takeaway from the report or your conversations with Nupur?
Cassie, if I could just offer for the folks who've joined us today to continue to work and spread the good message that wastewater can be something recycled, reclaimed, put back to use. No one thinks twice about recycling a glass bottle, but folks get real uptight when we start recycling water. So just think about being an ambassador for the value of recycled and reclaimed water in your work, in your personal life, in your home life. Public acceptance comes slowly, but we can all help. Thank you.
Thanks, Garrett. I also just wanted to add, I see Rob Cunningham from TNC in Europe on the line, and he was part of a report that was released last year called The Power of Policy. And Nupur, a lot of in reading this report again, a lot of the recommendations that we make are very much aligned with the recommendations in that report around nature-based solutions in general and the enabling conditions that we'd like to see. So I think there's definitely synergies across different teams at TNC working on these topics, and I think lots of opportunities to continue to elevate all of those messages and some of the common challenges that we're seeing in policy for nature-based solutions in general.
Thank you, Naabia. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. I really appreciate it. We will circulate, a link to the recording and the report once more, and I will reach out to Rob Cunningham to get a link to that report you just mentioned, Naabia. Thank you so much and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.